Good evening, everybody. Good to see you here on a Wednesday night. It's June 18th, 2025. The time is 6:59 p.m. And we are right on time. Everything seems to be streaming properly, and then the rest is up to God. We are going to have a nice little night tonight. I know that many in the audience wanted to see an immediate or as quick as possible part 2 for our talks with Mark from Michigan, just because there was so much that we laid down a lot of foundation, a lot of stories there. We were talking about the American Militia Movement that was kind of coming to a fever pitch, a peak in the 1990s with so much turmoil. You know, those of us who were in middle school years and having a ball out there, you weren't really paying attention to when you hear that there was a bomb scare at the Olympics in Atlanta and stuff, like, things like happen. Something weird is going on in the Bill Clinton White House, and who's this Monica Lewinsky and what's an intern? There's some things that we're conscious of if you're 8, 9, 10 years old. But other than that, we got a lot of dots connected the last time we were talking. We were talking about Rex 84, and then everything from Waco to Ruby Ridge to Oklahoma City, and so much more. In fact, tonight we're going to probably start with a question about Waco, because where we left off last time was a question that Mark wanted us to ask about the fires at Waco. Something very particular. It's something in particular about the fires, and I don't know if you remember that, but we'll get to it right up top. We're also going to be talking about a lot of OG alternative media figures that he's encountered along the way and may have known over the years. I have at least 3 that I want to talk about tonight. But also, whatever you guys have as far as questions go, please send it into Super Chat, because not only is it a great way for you to contribute to a show like we have tonight, perhaps on another night where we're not getting... I almost feel like this is the second big push of information. And then maybe on another time down the road when Mark calls in, we can start taking calls from the audience. You guys can ask your own questions. But you have an opportunity to send some in through either Super Chat on YouTube or the Rumble Rants, or quite frankly, superchat.com, which is powered by Streamlabs. So that's, that is, if you're thinking about what the most of the Super Chat goes to the show, it's quite frankly superchat.com. But I don't care how you contribute to the show and what's taken off the top, because something is better than nothing. And with everything that we're planning for this summer, as far as trying to introduce ourselves to new people and to also protect ourselves from desert dwelling nut jobs and everything else. What is he talking about? So vague. Who's this desert freak he's talking about? Oh, you'll know. I'll relish the opportunity to tell you all about it. But yeah, just support the show however you like. And when you're talking about Super Chats, it is a nightly sponsorship. That also comes a very long way in contributing to the overall conversation. So Mark from Michigan, he'll be on in just a couple of minutes, and that, I think that's also going to be available on the shortwave dial as well. So we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, now let's get to a little bit of grab bagging. Some big things off the top. Oh, well, that's Akira the Don. Thank you so much, Akira. Karen Reed found not guilty of murder and retrial in the boyfriend's death. She did have a driving under the influence, I think, or operating under the influence. So that's a OUI. I'm hoping that maybe we can get Megan Fox or somebody to come on the show with us on Friday night to talk about the ins and outs of the retrial. I don't know, because I don't know if Matt is going to be here. He's getting tattoo work done. He's covering up George Washington. He's correcting George Washington. We have to talk about that when he's on. Because that goes back years when he first revealed George Washington to us. And a couple of you went, interesting work. Anyway, I didn't know that he was going to cover it up, but apparently Matt thought it needed some correcting too. So we'll talk about that whenever he comes in. I don't know if it's going to be on Friday. He might be in the chair for a few hours. So either way, maybe we'll talk about Karen Reed. Trump privately approved attack plans for Iran, but has withheld the final order to give Iran some time to, I guess, bend the knee. That's what we're hearing out of the Wall Street Journal. Trump privately approved attack plans for Iran, but has withheld the final order, just saying, giving you one more chance. So I don't know if that comes up tonight, but you never know, because we might get through all of... I want to go to retrospective. I want to go back a few more decades leading... You want to talk about the militia movement? It wasn't just the 90s. It was leading up to that. And in fact, one of the things that we brought up in the last time we spoke with Mark was about how this was really burgeoning in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And I'd like to get him to discuss that just a little bit more, and that'll be that. All right. So we're going to call Mark in just a couple of minutes. What else do we have over here? What is this? Oh, shit. Leonardo's Curse. Krista, my producer, and I have been dubbing all these recent stories out of India. Leonardo's Curse. She came on the show with Chrissy Mayer and went in on India and everybody else. And now we've got a tourist destination. A bridge collapses in India. Of course, last week we had that horrendous plane crash. But not only that, did you see this one? Look at this headline from last week. Prince William's billionaire pal Sanjay Kapoor dead at 53 years old after swallowing a bee during a polo match. Did you hear about this? Longtime friend Sanjay Kapoor has died at 53 after swallowing a bee that triggered a fatal heart attack. Billionaire businessman and chairman of global car parts giant Sona Comstar collapsed. Sona Comstar is the company. Collapsed during a polo match in England on Thursday. Former husband of Bollywood superstar Karisma Kapoor was stung by a bee on the mouth, which subsequently triggered anaphylactic shock that caused his heart to stop, the outlet added. So we have dubbed this Leonardo's Curse, because it has been nothing but bad news ever since she came on the show for India and everybody associated with the country. So I don't know what to tell you. Doesn't look good. Other than that, I'll just say another big thank you to Keto Brainz. I would say get this into your routine. Get Keto Brainz into your health routine. I usually dump this right down the old gullet over here. I don't even put it into anything when it's in the studio. It's a super formula for optimizing brain function. Whether you need razor sharp focus at work, it's there for you. If you need a couple extra reps during your physical training, it's there for you. No sugar, no gas station energy drink jitters, no crash, nothing like that. It's just aminos and healthy fats. If you want to try some, email me, frank@quitefrankly.tv if you want some samples. But you can also get just 20% off your first order right now using promo code Frankly on ketobrainz.com. That's it. Let's get this show started. Thank you all so much.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anybody else want to stay? Let's ride!
No significant time. We're not going to give any significant time to it. That's all I have. All right. Okay. So let's call Mark, shall we? Mark from Michigan, Mark Koernke. In our first broadcast, we discussed his military background, early years in alternative media, and some of the pivotal events that brought the militia movement to a fever pitch in the 90s. So
your call cannot be completed at this time. Please hang up.
Really? Really? The call can't be completed? Why don't you go F yourself? Who the hell do you think you are? Who are you even?
One, two, three.
Mark from Michigan, 1, 2, 3.
Oh, hold on a second. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Do we have a copy?
We do. It's great to have you on. How the hell you been?
Getting wet and rainy here. Michigan's got a thunderstorm wave running through right now. I'm watching the ducks, which are very happy from the second story. So,
does that mean it's going to be our rain in a couple of days over here in New York? Is that how it works?
You might be the next one. It could fish hook that way. We'll see what happens. Right now, it just came up from Indiana. And, yeah, it probably will swing east, go across Lake Erie, head up the Ontario, and it'll be right in your backyard because it'll head down the St. Lawrence. That's probably what it's going to do, too. So,
well,
watch for some moisture.
We will. We will. And if it does, it's going to come in the form of steam because I saw that we're going to hit triple digits next week. So, yeah, it's crazy, but it is summertime after all. How's everything been? I know exactly where I want to start tonight, but first we just want to get a little bit of a report for you. It's been weeks.
Well, so long, Mom. I'm off to drop the bomb, so don't wait up for me. Oh, wait a minute. Did I say that? Look at all of the bizarre twists that have happened just in the last couple of weeks. I was promised that if I voted for a certain person, we weren't going to go to war. Did you remember that promise? I remember that promise. I guess my memory span is only supposed to be between 3 weeks and 3 months. And then I'm supposed to go into catatonic brain fart and just act like an idiot or a lemming and jump over the cliff with a bunch of other crazy people who just want to go to war. I think that's fascinating.
It is, and I think the same thing. We were talking about it. I think that the audience here is largely just anti-war, no matter what. I haven't, and I hope, of course, that it just ends up being just more brinksmanship as usual, because no matter who's in office, we're always on the brink of something, Mark.
Yeah, but this time we opened a can of really bad sauerkraut that's been sitting too long on the shelf, and the can is rotted on the inside. And somebody's trying to tell us we need to take a big spoonful of that rotten, dirty sauerkraut, probably with a little bit of dead fish oil stuck in there for good measure. So I think we're in trouble, but that's just me.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to bridge the gap between the past and the present and get all this tied up in a nice bow toward the end. But yeah, that is definitely what's on a lot of people's minds. And you know what? Before we get even further deeper into this conversation, are people able to tune in on shortwave again tonight? If so, let them know where.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we were last couple of days. Well, actually, for about 6 days, we have been on maintenance mode for the second hour, not this hour, but the next hour. So you got time to break out your radio, your AM/FM shortwave radio, and if you're a ham operator, you can tune in also. They already know that to 6.160 regular shortwave. That will be for the next hour from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that is on WBCQ, The Planet, and that's 6.160 regular shortwave, where this program will be heard all around a third to half of the planet tonight. So you're going to be talking to Czechs and possibly Nigerians. I know you'll be talking to people from Brazil, the Caribbean, also, many points of the Caribbean. So there's a lot of people that... quite frankly, we'll be waving to tonight and be able to speak to directly, which is really cool.
Personally, I can't wait to say hello to all of our friends in Bangladesh again. That was very fun. That was fun. So, but yeah, it's very cozy night when you're on, Mark, and we have that added element to everything that we're doing over here. So, all right, let's jump right back into where we left off, because you left us with a question the last time we spoke, and you said, Frank, you have to remember, well, next time we get together, remember to ask me about the fires at WACO. Now, of course, WACO, all people remember, even if you were born after the fact, if you look into it, the fires are front and center. But you said in particular, a fire ritual, a ritual that was happening at WACO. What the hell were you talking about?
As a matter of fact, there are a number of people that the control media didn't do anything to interview, didn't make an attempt to interview. Number one, let's qualify. WACO was a vast consumption of manpower. One of the things that the Fed did not want any of you to know is that it took everything they had from around the country to maintain a daily siege on just one location in the United States. Now, because of this, most of you don't know this. When they were during the early days of the siege, they started recruiting from SWAT teams from all over the United States. Right here in Washtenaw County, volunteers from the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department SWAT team, Ann Arbor Police, and other departments around the country, not just here in Michigan, rotated down and volunteered to stare at the Branch Davidians in their home. They had to do this because even the initial attack took almost all of the central ATF division's manpower. Now, I've mentioned before that they were practicing at Fort Hood for a full year before they attacked. But when they did attack, each time they came together, they had to take manpower that was from a detachment from, say, Kansas. Another detachment came in from Oklahoma. Another detachment was obviously from Texas. But they were not all from the same location. After the first day's attack, which thank God failed, what happened is they had to start pulling in manpower. So as the siege progresses, there are a certain number of feds who stay on site. Now, this is a lot of qualification, but the reason I bring this up is that there were several feds who stayed for the whole siege. What they did is during the siege, they videotaped the entire activity, top to bottom. They literally were videotaping, making snide comments, laughing about killing the women and kids, making all kinds of jokes. Now, I'll explain to you how we know that beyond a shadow of a doubt just in a moment. Meanwhile, through the whole of the siege, another group that showed up there that had to be there was Texas Public Safety, sometimes known as the Red Balls. If you ever look at Texas, you'll notice that in the last couple of instances here with some of the riots, you see these guys with these really bright red, medium red circles on their arms. Those are the equivalent to what most states have in the way of state police. Now, the public safety personnel had to man probably about a third of the siege during WACO. They certainly maintained all of the outer security, but here's the thing. They also maintained control of the motor pool for the tanks, the robots, and all the other weapons that they brought in preparation for murdering the Branch Davidians. In addition to that, they also managed rotation of personnel for the inner ring, the second ring, and the outer siege ring of the Branch Davidian church and home. Because of this, everybody had to be used. They had to pull people in. Some individuals stayed for almost the entire siege. One of them was the OIC, officer in charge. He was a lieutenant with the Texas Public Safety. After the siege, I had him up on the air multiple times. In fact, in our archives, usually I would bring him in for 3 hours, a full 3 hours of programming, and we literally did a debrief on the air from the beginning of the siege to the end of the siege. And we did this on worldwide WWCR, Worldwide Christian Radio, on shortwave. We were on satellite, on 3 different satellite systems, and we were, of course, on AM and FM and on satellite pickup also, regular satellite from, again, commercial uplinks. We also had a number of other officers, both from the sheriff's departments, local, et cetera, that reported on what transpired and the hypocrisy and wickedness of the feds while they were there. Okay? But the last day was most critical. On the last day, a unique group that no one had ever seen before showed up in the morning at WACO, the day of the burn. These individuals, there was an entire detachment, were totally alien to the ATF, the FBI, the Russians that were there, the Israelis that were there, and the Brits that were there. Okay? They were an American unit. As he pointed out, before the burn started, he was told to go to a GP medium tent that was used for meetings. This officer, who was, by the way, in charge of all of the Texas public safety personnel there, he was the OIC, officer in charge. He went into the tent, and there's nobody there but this guy sitting in the middle of the tent in a chair, folding chair, and he's got his arms crossed. And he goes, come here. And the only thing he kept saying he said it 3 times, he goes, Semper Fi. Semper Fi. Don't you forget, Semper Fi. In other words, always faithful, always faithful, always faithful. Well, this unit is the unit that went in and shot the Branch Davidians. When the APCs go into nobody does that. You don't take a vehicle into any building or burning building and perforate it. Well, they did this because the APCs had insertion teams. The insertion teams were wearing full mop gear. They were wearing gas masks with full hood. They were combat kitted, both pistol and they had rifle. When they went into the building, they popped the door, went in through the smoke-filled, areas of the building because it was on fire by that point, or started to, work fire. Also was full of CSCN. You got to remember that's like, again, solid, dense CSCN smoke. This is why a lot of the Branch Davidians were shot in the head, because they were shot in the head not by suicide. They were shot in the head at point-blank range. Problem: however many the number is that they sent in, they lost 6 people in the fire. The shooters did. During the video, which you can watch, which is WACO Rules of Engagement. Write this down, people. WACO Rules of Engagement. I want you to watch the whole video. But I want you to pay attention when they're burning the place down. Because in that video, if you watch, there's a guy that comes out of a second floor window. He's wearing full mop chemical gear. He's carrying an M16. He has a gas mask on. He walks out. He steps out through the window on the second floor with the building on fire behind him. He walks to the edge of the roof. A combat engineer vehicle pulls up. He steps off the roof onto the turret. It pulls away. The guy, meanwhile, walks down the front of the turret, down the glacis plate, and the vehicle pulls right up next to an ATF and I think 2 other FBI agents that are in full combat kit. And he jumps off and stands there, and they're watching the fire. Who's this guy that came out of the building? He's one of the murderers, okay? Now, while this is happening, remember that all of the official video was done that you see for propaganda purposes, mostly to terrorize the American population, was done by the controlled press by more than a mile away, and they were using telephoto lenses to only see one side of the building. But the ATF agents and other agents were running cameras because they were going to put it in their personal brag-up archive, which they did. At the time when they were evacuating and the building was going up in flames, and while they were shooting the people at the back that were trying to escape through the public area, the general commerce area, like a kitchen, the big kitchen open area they had for meetings, the ATF and FBI agents and other agents, but not the state police, not the sheriff's department, and none of the volunteers. The ATF and FBI lined up from the far point on the right of the building, around behind it, and around to the front on the left side as you would see it. So they could not be seen from the camera point, and they knew they couldn't. Progressively, they all, at a given point, they put their hands over their head. Now, they're all radio connected. They put their hands over their head, and they start bowing to the flames in unison, and they continue. They don't do this like once or twice. They repeatedly, over and over again, bow to the flames, and they bow to the flames. This is caught on video. This thing in particular is all on video. Yes, this is VHS that was done by an ATF agent. Here's how the video was acquired. After the siege, most of the ATF units that participated in the beginning, many of which were held around till the end because they needed the manpower, many of the individuals were let go by the ATF. One of the individuals, while he was being reprimanded in the post-burn period after the siege, his wife contracted cancer. He, of course, needed money. Through the many different sources that we had, the individual offered his entire video collection that he had taken at WACO for a market price. It was up for grabs. So Linda Thompson, with a whole bunch of other people putting a little bit of money together, bought his collection of VHS tapes that were first person original copy for $10,000. The video, when you watch, now I'm going to point something out. All of the video that you see, most of it from the burn point in WACO Rules of Engagement, came from that collection. So why didn't they show the feds bowing to the flames?
So that's not, so the bowing is not in Rules of Engagement.
No, it's not.
Is it available for the public to watch anywhere?
Hold on. Now I'm going to explain to you the step-by-step fasting history of all of the videos, not just that one. McNulty is the man. You're going to go look at this. This is all Patriot history. The average person doesn't have any interest in real history, so they were ignoring all of this. But McNulty was an independent film producer. Go look, watch the video. But he was a former Fed. Now, how did WACO Rules of Engagement, which is a very damning video to the ATF and the FBI, how did it get made? Plus, there's a second video that was done afterwards. Okay? Well, originally, WACO Rules of Engagement was supposed to be a sponsored hit piece against the Branch Davidians. The original production was financed by Robert Redford. You know who Robert Redford is, right? Okay. Yeah. Robert Redford financed McNulty, a former Fed, to actually produce a hit video that was supposed to be as damning of the Branch Davidians as possible. It was done for the Sundance Film Festival. If you look in the 90s, look up WACO Rules of Engagement, Sundance Film Festival, you will find that it was released there. The video is not what Robert Redford wanted, and he pissed a fit. Here's the problem. Linda Thompson had the video. Now, I'm going to tell you something right now. Before my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, I am a first-person witness to this because I had both the copy of the video in hand and was able to watch the copies of all of the videos, every last one of them that were available. But most specifically, the bowing to the flames, I've seen it first person. It's not somebody said, somebody heard.
And you're saying that that's a force that's a force that's comprised of people from multiple agencies.
It was from all of the Fed agencies. Right. Nobody from the Sheriff's Department, nobody from the Texas Public Safety with their state police, and no one from any of the policing agencies, the regular police, participated in it. In fact, they stepped back. Now, that's a second story. That's a sidebar to the original video because we didn't take the video. And the other cops did. It was done by the ATF agents that were there, an ATF agent. Now, understand, he sold that collection. McNulty had that in hand when he did the first video, WACO Rules of Engagement, but he didn't use it. Now, there's a backstory to that. He's a former Fed. My personal attitude on this is that he was trying to find out just exactly how much the Patriot movement knew because we are intel collectors and we're first-person intel collectors, so we had a vast amount of knowledge on what happened. In fact, if you watch the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth WACO hearings in Congress, you will find that almost all of that data wasn't collected by Congress because they couldn't find their ass if their life depended on it. Instead, it was because of independent collection agencies that got hold of forensics data, telecommunications, all the other stuff, everything that was available, but they just didn't seem to be able to find. They didn't make the effort. So what happened is the individuals who were motivated congressmen, we made contact with them and provided an ongoing steady source of heavily documented date, time, place, who, what, where, when. And so they couldn't wiggle out of it, which is why instead of there just being one WACO hearing, there were 7. Because every time they tried to lie their way out of it, they got caught in their lies. So then they had to come back again because they thought they'd re-engineer it, and they failed again. Now, the videos that were available, McNulty had access to, and he paid Linda Thompson, just as Linda Thompson paid the ATF agent, for access to the videos. The argument later on that came up was the reason McNulty, by the way, a former Fed, so I consider he's just a spit swapper and ring knocker, okay? He did do a good job with WACO rules of engagement. Watch it, guys. You tell me if it didn't work. It didn't do what Robert Redford did. It virtually damned the Feds across the board. However, his plan was that if he showed that he had so much information, the federal government would charge the agencies, you all know how this is going to work, that he was going to charge the agencies with crimes, criminal activity, because these were actual murders and actual crimes that had taken place that were well documented. What's interesting about this is that the second video that's done by McNulty covers the use of demolition charges and all of the evidence that was readily available that was on site. Now, in addition, the lieutenant that I was talking about earlier handed to me a vast portfolio of photographs that he took of the event and the day. Now, the problem with his situation, while he had known about what the Feds were doing, his position during the time of the activity when they were burning the church down put him basically out in front of the cameras for the press and, in front of the Branch Davidians' front doors.
Okay, but Mark, now, are we going to get back? The question really focused on a ritualistic aspect to what we know is a fish in the barrel act of murder. Okay, and so what you're talking about, the ATF agent who had a health emergency in the family. They needed to be able to get some money for treatment, so they sold off all of their personally acquired and filmed tapes. And then, of course, those tapes were were sold off yet again. And inside those tapes, that collection is, of course, the hand on the head and the bowing to the fire and over again. You swear you've seen it yourself, but I mean, anybody who is looking to have something to go off of instead of our theory versus your theory will say, "Hey, well,
this is no theory."
Well,
okay,
but that's the question is, where is it?
First of all, hold on. That's my point. Is McNulty had full access, and McNulty has copies. Now, the question is, because again, my argument was that this person should not be trusted, but I was not the custodian of the document. It's just literally McNulty accessed every bit of technical information that was available, and in fact had interviewed. This is why, again, the second video covers a lot of what happened, backstorying what happened with how they killed the women and kids in the cold cellar, the storm shelter, etc. It was questioned, and again, this is where everybody confronted him because we all knew it was available. McNulty then locked up the database. Now, my argument was that it should have been reproduced and a complete set should have been separately run. Linda Thompson's dead now, so I can't do any more to question her on what little logic she might have used. She was a lawyer. See, my problem with this is, and I'm warning everybody now, that whenever you have officers of the court, whenever you have individuals who are involved with the Fed, their first sworn oath is to protect the business, not to protect the truth.
Okay, so let me ask you this.
My biggest problem with this is, again, that, I'm nicer than some people because what I should have done and is literally just pull the stuff sideways. However, it wasn't under my custodialship. I had access to it, but it was not under our control. And at the time, especially just after WACO, the argument was that they were going to go after the Feds and bring the Feds into court, and we didn't want to flip too many cards, and we were going to catch them in the wind. Well, none of that happened. I've seen all of this before. I've watched repeat ad nauseum this type of again, can you call it naivety or is it stupidity? Because our enemy acts consistently over and over and over again the same way. And anytime you let any actor or try to give, the benefit of the doubt to any actor in any of the Fed mechanism, well, it's like you just saw with Donald Trump and what's going on overseas. I'm not going to take you to war, and we're going to war.
Well, let me ask you again.
So a variation on that is with what happened with the database with the possibility of a very effective communications base being used to get the word out. It did. A lot of information did get out. If you haven't seen Waco rules of engagement, and then the second video. Both of them, I think, are on YouTube, so you can watch them there.
Well, let me ask you, Mark, about the videos, because I really want to make the best of all of our time here. And
go ahead.
So, as far as the ritual goes, this thing that you said that was happening, obviously, there's no way for any of us to see it, but you say you've seen it, and it has been. Ownership has been transferred at least 2 times, and but there's no place for anybody to go view it. Now, from your ability to view this and the people you've been able to talk to who might have had any insight on the ground as far as what these agents were doing with the hand on the head and the rhythmic bowing and all that stuff, were you over the years able to obtain any kind of information about what the ritual was about, what deity they might be saying? What was it? Just a big mockery?
Well,
was it
no. First of all, it was not a mockery. Okay, and remember, they literally, when you see the,
so then what do you know? What do you know about the particular thing?
In this particular situation, it was a Moloch ceremony is what it looked like. If you've seen any of the Baal or Moloch mimics that are done, these characters all did the miter type with the hands. They didn't just lift the hands straight over their head. They did the 90-degree angle consistently. Now, some of these people were standing on the ground. Some were standing on Branch Davidian wrecked vehicles. Some were in different locations in this arc that went around the far side, the left and right and far side of the back of the building. Now, here's the thing. Meanwhile, the survivors of the shooters that went inside had to be assisted, and many of them did. A number of them died inside. Okay, I have photographs from the lieutenant of the first thing that the feds did as the fire died down, and while the feds started to disperse from the ceremony where they were bowing. First thing that a white cube van came in, stopped right in front of where the front doors would be. A team jumped out. They opened the back end. They pulled out a number of body bags. They went right to the front doors of the Branch Davidian Church, grabbed the front doors, put them in the cube van. But then the teams went to specific points in the wreckage while it was still smoldering. And this is where the fire had just died down, but they went to specific locations. They grabbed specific bodies, put them into body bags, walked them back over, threw them in the back of the cube van, and unasked the AO. They left. So what they were doing is recovering the shooters. Now, the argument is that even the lieutenant said that the rumoration that came from the Fed is that the people that were brought in as shooters were, quote unquote, bracket Delta Force. Now, it's not called Delta Force. But at that time, it's think about the year, 1993. That's how people would identify them. In the week after, a convenient burn accident takes place at Fort Hood, in which a number of Special Forces personnel, everybody died in the aircraft. The aircraft, I looked at the wreckage. It did not appear to be a crash. It wasn't a smashed egg or anything like that. Looks like they took an old Huey, parked it out in the field, put the bodies inside, lit a couple of Willie Pete's, let the fuel do the rest, and they had a crash. What they did is they covered for the bodies that were lost in the building in Waco. Gotcha. Again, if you watch Waco Rules of Engagement, you can see one of them walk out of the building. Who would be in the building?
Well, let me shift gears now again.
Go ahead.
Before we go to the next, I have a voicemail question from you that I guess is a little bit more broad spectrum and gets a little bit more into the Rex 84 stuff that you were talking about the first time you were on. But since you mentioned it, how do you know, and again, is there any way that we can verify that Israeli and British forces were there on the ground?
Absolutely. No, hold on. Right there. Let's stop right there. First of all, the BBC with the Russians. Let's start with the Russians. The BBC did a 3-part series that was broadcast on the BBC bragging about what was going on at Waco. And they specifically covered the Russian psychological warfare unit. They had brought in a couple of full-size semi-vans. In the military, a van is a cargo / looks like a box truck, or it can be a semi-trailer that is configured for maintenance, electronics, or construction and operations. In this case, these were electronics vans. The dying rabbit sounds and all the rest of that was managed by the Russians who were brought in. If you watch any of the government hearings, in fact, the man died right after the first one. the man who invented FLIR, explained what it is that the aircraft above WACO was observing, because everybody that presented it in earlier testimony lied. The inventor of FLIR pointed out that the British SAS pilots and personnel who were operating the equipment were using American standard that he had established and built. It was denied, but then had to be admitted that, for instance, and that's where the British contingent comes in, the British contingent were the individuals who were flying over American soil the FLIR aircraft that hovered over the Branch Davidians through the whole of the siege. The Israeli personnel came in as part of the ATF, FBI, MJTF, and JTF, which is Multi-Jurisdictional Task Force, and Joint Task Force Element, which was multinational. The Israelis probably were the managers. The officer in charge of the state police constantly had to deal with the Israeli Mossad personnel or Israeli secret police, whoever the hell they were, since they weren't allowed to question their identity. So at least three nations were on the ground, three different elements were on the ground. But let's remember something. The Branch Davidians weren't all from the United States, were they? Everybody understand that? They weren't all Americans. Did anybody ever do a study, ever follow up and actually look to see who the Branch Davidians were?
I haven't.
Well, take the time, because there's 100, look how many victims there are. Well, what's interesting is that, again, the Israelis, well, we don't know how they push themselves in, but they typically do. They're operating all over the United States right now. While we speak, they're getting ready to do something to us to help promote what's going on overseas. But in this situation, Americans had to deal with them, and the follow-up congressional records, the congressional hearings, they tried desperately to deflect this information, which is what probably the person in it, and we're bringing this up, they're questioning it because desperately they're trying not to acknowledge it. See, after all, what it means is that, no, this isn't anything new. This has been going on for quite some time. And in this case, this was a blatant police state action to try and terrorize the population of the United States. There's two aspects of this. You're going into the globalist phase where they were getting ready to push NAFTA and GATT. If you listen to most of the comments in social media made by a bunch of different pundits right now, they keep benchmarking 1994 and 1995 as the jump off or the ledge where all of a sudden, number one, the government stopped worrying about budget. Number two, they seemed also to have brought in a lot of other economic elements to manipulate the American economy, blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what, kids? This is the precursor leading up to. And as I said in the last time we were here, the purpose of WACO was supposed to be the pièce de résistance. It was supposed to be the cherry on the top of the banana split of attacking gun owners, manufacturers, and FFLs. It was not planned by Bill Clinton. It was planned by neocon George Herbert Walker Bush. And by the way, in the 7 different congressional hearings, both Senate and congressional, by the way, at least in 3 of them, it was demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt because they had to produce the timeline. How did this abortion get started? Well, guess what? They had to acknowledge that a year before the attack puts you 12 months into the Bush administration. Bill Clinton had nothing to do with it, but Bill Clinton was anti-gun. He's a globalist. He's joined at the hip with the Bushes. Guess what? It was a natural extension, and its purpose was in the initial, if the attack had gone the way it was supposed to, it was supposed to be a big gun confiscation. And it would be the excuse for why they need to have, grab the guns. Now, let's not forget, only a short time later, they did the assault weapons ban. And if they'd had the proper motivation, they'd have ramrodded more through, but they couldn't get more through.
Okay. All right. So then there.
So that's the premise for why they did it. Go ahead. Jump
okay. That's a perfect segue for this next thing. And then we're going to get back to questions from the audience right after this. But
yeah,
you were talking about you right there again. You just brought up the just the pinnacle of all the action in the 1990s and what this was the reason for. But even on the first time that we spoke with each other, before we even got on the air, you had mentioned to me, said, "Listen, well, the militia movement of the 90s, you're not just talking about the 90s, and you're not you have to understand the 80s, but you went a couple of steps further than that last time." And I don't want this to take up 3 hours because we're going to have to. We're going to talk about several decades now. But you went as far as saying it's not even about the 80s leading into the 90s, but it's not even about, of course, when we think of the 60s and the 70s, we think about cultural counter revolutions and all that other stuff, and we think about tumultuous times and political assassinations. So that's crazy enough in itself. But you said that what came to a head in the 90s actually started in the late 40s and 50s, which that seems, for anybody that just looks back casually on those years after the war, we look at that as like, Pax Americana, where it's just the years that the suburbs were exploding and culture was nice and stable, and there were no real big time problems that we started seeing in the 60s and the 70s. So if you can skip through the decades to show how we went from just the end of World War II right into the 90s and have it all string together.
In the 30s, with the Great Depression, you have two factions, and the first one is never going to be given any coverage. It was the American Patriot Movement of that day. What happened is, in 1929, when the Great Depression hit, a lot of people knew it was coming. Many people knew that it was a foreign influence that was going to try to undermine the economy. The population was better armed than the military. In fact, they always whine about that. We need a bigger military. We were so small. Well, that's because the population as a whole was armed. And not only that, but guys, we owned tanks, we owned artillery, we owned machine guns. We didn't rob banks. That was the mafia and organized crime that did that. But what they didn't like, especially since what they were doing was a power grab, an outside faction, the people who brought you the Federal Reserve, planned, created a collapse, pulled the money supply out of the United States. Well, it didn't go the way they expected for two reasons. Number one, not everybody was caught flat-footed. Also, people organized in advance, individuals under the traditional format of militia. Got to remember, that's almost 100 years ago now. Well, successfully, they blocked a lot of activity that otherwise the Fed wanted to proceed with under what eventually would be the War Powers Act of 1933. The three instruments you need to look at to understand how close we came to a civil war in that period of time is, number one, there's a fourth one because I'll start with that, the banking crisis. There was no banking crisis. The only banking crisis is that the kosher mafia, the 10 foreign banks that made up the Federal Reserve, were losing control of the money supply because Americans were producing their own cash. And they were doing it by creating local currencies. By the time we get to the end of 1930, over 300 plus private currencies were in circulation across the United States. But to back it up, militia provided the ass to make sure that the Fed couldn't try to steal anything else. Now, the money supply had been pulled back by the Federal Reserve. All the banks pulled all the cash out because the foreign Federal Reserve demanded cash payment in currency, printed currency or gold. They couldn't get the gold. We privately owned it. So what they did, they declared a banking emergency in 1932-33. Franklin Delano Roosevelt came in, declared the banking emergency, but then also ramrodded what? He ramrodded the War Powers Act of 1933, the Gold Act of 1933, and the Gun Control Act of 1933-1934. It was initiated in 33, wasn't closed until 34 with regard to all of its actions. In the meantime, the unsung story of the American population was as well armed and was preparing to revolt. You have a story that you will see about a Medal of Honor winner, a certain Marine, who was approached by American entrepreneurs and the American Legion. Now, the communists who didn't like that will tell you all about how horrible it was, but we were a breath away from a civil war in 1933-34.
Are you talking about Smedley Butler?
Yes. When Smedley Butler made that public announcement, Smedley Butler had been approached by he goes, it was approached by money interests. Well, of course you were, because American money interests were taking back the banking and money system. The Federal Reserve wasn't the only currency in 1933. You had Ford currency, which was through Manufacturers Bank. You had Michigan currency, you had New York currency, you had different municipalities. Dallas had its own currency. And what they did is they used what few Federal Reserve notes or United States notes, which were not Federal Reserve notes, they used those purely as commutation money between the different states. If I had to say, you're in, okay, where you are, I got to buy iron from you. My Michigan dollars don't work in your state, but Federal Reserve notes as a national currency do. So what you would do is translate Michigan dollars over to Federal Reserve notes that hadn't been turned into the Federal Reserve to bankrupt the country. You in turn send a courier to New York. They pay with the United States notes, translate it into New York or, Schmidlap steel or whatever the notes were, and then you pay what the steel is worth, and then you get the steel transported back to Michigan so you can continue to build things.
Okay, wait. Now, Mark, this is the first time I'm ever seeing anything like this. I'm reading it right now because I was thinking, okay, 1933, how many private currencies? To these days you think about cryptocurrency, things like that.
Yeah,
but
money is not new.
No,
it's this whole idea. Yeah.
So what you're talking about? Are you talking about what they're talking? What is I found over here called municipal scripts? It's far more than, okay, here's the problem with the internet. Number one, money is sacred. Money, the ring knockers want to be the only ones to control currency. This is why they altered the American money system with the Federal Reserve System before World War I. The fact of the matter is that traditionally I have 100 different notes from 100 different banks that were all currency generated by those banks. Traditionally, the Fed was not the only entity that could create service notes. Now, here's another thing. We're getting off on a sidebar here with money, but understand something. There are 7 different types of currencies in circulation right now. At any given time, you only see 3 of them. The other 4 are high bank transmission notes of different types, and they are alien. They are bills, and you would recognize that they're bills, but you would think they were funny money. So currency, where you're taught in a very menial way to understand currency, it's totally different. It can throw out everything you know about money. However, anything and everything can be money. In the 80s and 90s, Sun dollars. Look that up. You might still find it. They might have culled it from the database because they do that all the time. But Sun dollars are probably one of the longest running of the independent currencies in the United States. They're in your neck of the woods. They were operating in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and they were good in West Virginia. Okay.
Sun, S-U-N, Sun.
Well,
dollars.
I'm sorry to pull us off. So we're again.
No, that's okay.
Leading up to the 90s and the militia fever pitch of the 90s. Now we're getting into the 40s and 50s. Let's get through those because I have a lot of questions from the audience I want to get to.
Absolutely. Okay. Now, in the World War II period, the argument is they did World War II because they realized they couldn't stop the Depression. They couldn't get out of it. They'd already altered the courts with the Buck Act of 1938. We almost went to war, but we never came off that. This is why the Democrats all through the beginning of World War II were paranoid because the Republicans were resisting and said there was no reason for any of these activities. There's all kinds of investigations against the Republicans, just like you see today. If you think this is all new, the enemy has done this for decades. It's just when you don't, if you're the guy who's printing the history, you just don't make sure anybody reads about the history. Now, what we don't have at the beginning of World War II is something that they wanted at the end of World War I, the League of Nations. The League of Nations is still in San Francisco, but it was not able to gain power because patriots and veterans stopped it at the beginning after World War I. So what happens is they start pushing in America where they got everybody overseas. The leftists always do this. They started pushing the UN, changing the name from League of Nations. They always change the name. It's just like ecology, but now you call it climate change. You see how the scam works? The ecologists were no different from the climate changers. I was there. I could give you all the notes. I have files here from when I was in college and watched all this BS. So the fact is that, again, now we get into it's almost the end of World War II. Everybody starts to find out what's happening inside the U.S. The sugar-coated version is mostly BS. In reality, patriots coming back, especially veterans from overseas, started to organize. There were militia literally all over the country because when they came back, they found out just how deep the leftists had begun to operate on the colleges, what they were doing in many of the major cities. The militia organized also, and the Patriot Movement organized to stop the UN, just like they did in 1919 and 1920-21. Well, you know what they did here in the United States? Utilizing the existing War Powers Act that had been generated from World War II, a series of them, a private and mostly Hebrew secret police operation that was all over the country, randomly arrested in each state over 2,000 to 2,800 individuals. Now, does this sound familiar with something you just saw? Can I say January 6th? These individuals were grabbed in a series of raids because they opposed the UN. In Michigan, the entire group were detained for 2 years without charges, without trial, and without the possibility of release for 2 years straight. When were they released? They were released after the confirmation of the United Nations.
Well,
now a whole lot of people were part of that, and they in turn were teaching a whole lot of people about the wicked ways of the regime and the people who had hijacked our country who weren't from our country.
Not only that, but I know that we, even little smaller stories that have kind of slipped into legend and lore, like the Battle of Athens, Tennessee, with all those returning veterans that had found that their local municipalities had been taken over just by, self-interested local thugs and all that. It wasn't a very big plot, but still, that was it. There's a lot of returning war veterans that came back to America and realized that many of them probably had a lot of questions of their own.
Well, this leads us into the next part. We'll go try to get you real quick before the top here.
Please.
Okay, real quick. Korean War. Why is it the Forgotten War? Remember, that's a term for it. You know that, right? The Forgotten War? Why is it called the Forgotten War? Why would you forget that war?
Because it was a UN initiative, and it was...
It wasn't a war, was it?
Right.
It was a conflict. If it was a war, then we'd have a very different situation. But it was the first of the George Orwell 1984 wars. You had a contained conflict between two forces, right out of George Orwell's 1984 with the Malabar Front, in which you could seesaw up and down the peninsula, get a lot of people killed, people they didn't care about, Koreans, and whoever else they threw in, Americans, anybody else, and other countries. Don't worry, we weren't the only ones there. But what's interesting about this is a lot of people were first-person witnesses to exactly what was happening internationally. And one of the reasons they needed everybody to forget it is because too many people came back as veterans and said, let me tell you what I saw. And so since World War I, they've been coaching everybody to not believe your dad or your uncle when they come back and tell you what they saw, so they can sugar puff or alter the history. We're at the top, so I'll tell you what, I can relate a story that just gives you the classic example of this. But most important here is that after World War II and then after Korea, a whole bunch of people realized there was a movement. Now we have McCarthy come in. And McCarthy was crazy because he told you there were communists all through your government. And that's just crazy, except those communists are at the other end of the scale now. And they're right where McCarthy told you they were. And they're doing to this country exactly what McCarthy told you they would do, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
So McCarthy wasn't wrong at all. But the propaganda machine working with the people who were the invaders, well, they did what they were supposed to do. However, here's another group that you don't know anything about probably. The Minutemen. Now, I want you to look that term up in the psychobabble machine called the Internet now. Look up Minutemen and see what you get for a response. Now, actually, print in modern Minutemen. Now, M-E-N, not M-A-N. M-E-N. Now, while you're doing that, you're going to end up with, probably 28,000 pop-ups right away. Then it's going to go to 57. Then it's going to go to infinity, whatever. The Minutemen we're talking about are not the Minutemen who were on the border since the late 1980s or 1990s. The Minuteman movement was the militia movement of the 50s, 60s, and into the early 70s. They were constituted public militias that literally countered the different communist and or the leftist factions that were all over the country. If you write it out of the history books, it never happened. But here's the problem. There are enough books, and it's hard to burn all the books. It really is, contrary to what they say. And so there's more than enough hard copy that should be in your database in the electronic venue, but strangely enough isn't. So most of your database is corrupted by selective insertion of information. In other words, garbage in, garbage out. Yeah. The Minutemen were very public. The Minutemen were in fact, there was a little standoff. They made they made a movie in which the Minutemen respond to Mexicans occupying the Alamo. You've probably never seen the movie.
No.
But if you search for it, you will find it. And the subject matter is the Minutemen. Now, the Minutemen were as well armed, all still within now this is pre-Gun Control Act of 1968. So the Minutemen were as well armed and equipped as any conventional infantry formation as they should be. In many cases, these Minuteman formations, such as in Ohio, also constituted what would be the third tier of state defense forces. This is why when you read the body of the law for Ohio's state constitution, you need to do this with the state constitutions, and read what it says about militia. See, they don't do that. We have state constitutions, not just the federal constitution. And all of them spell out the expanded nature of the militia. Now, there's a reason for this. They can't draft you if you're not in the militia. So all of you listening who think you're not, if you go over to Title 10 and you go over all the rest of United States Code and you read it, you're going to understand that they have to have you as militia, because what they're doing when you call it the draft, that's like drafting beer. You're all part of the militia at large. And what they do is selectively mobilize you by utilizing a randomized lottery system, they claim, to mobilize larger formations of militia than just specific state select militia. So that's how the law is written. Go ahead. So Mark, the militia was in place that whole time. Go ahead.
The whole time, and now we're into the 70s. So would you say that is it? Because by the 60s, I would see how the 60s and the 70s in and of themselves would have been a major acceleration point for anybody who's starting to smell a rat, especially coming from the national security state and all that other stuff with the drug experiments and the culture going sideways, liberation and all that other crap. So that brings us right to the front door of the 80s again. I guess, is that where... Are we full steam ahead at this point from the 70s and the 80s, or when?
I'll tell you what. Let's do this. We're a little past the top. Let's do a station identifier real quick so we can let everyone know, because you're on shortwave now.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Guys, for everybody out there, I'd like to say good evening. This is Mark Koernke, and we've got Quite Frankly here. We've got Frank from Quite Frankly, and you're listening to us on Quite Frankly on Rumble. We're also on www.libertytreeradio.4mg.com, libertytreeradio.org, and a handshake, a wave to all of our friends on WBCQ, The Planet, 6.160, regular shortwave. Right now, Frank's voice is being heard by friends across the planet, both with their internet. By the way, they do have an internet feed for WBCQ, and shortwave. And shortwave talks to the planet anonymously. Nobody knows you're listening, which is really kind of cool.
It makes that.
It makes it real guerrilla radio.
Oh yeah,
get it?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I'd rather that than the digital. Sometimes I think it's very romantic, but it's great to have every every available tool come together to make this happen tonight. So welcome again. It's great to make your acquaintance wherever you are or whenever you are. This could be years later, but still. Okay, so Mark and I were just talking about a timeline of the American militia movement coming out of World War II and then leading us right into the 1990s, where the first time that Mark was on, about a month ago, we were able to talk about the kind of like the pinnacle of all the action and the reaction to the American militia movement in the 90s, when we had the very high profile events like Ruby Ridge and Oklahoma City and Waco, which we opened up with tonight. And we are now just cruising through the 70s and 80s before we get to some questions from the audience. So, Mark, you want to wrap up there?
Now, let me ask you something, because you're younger. How many bombings took place in the United States in the 1950s? How many bombings by leftist organizations took place in the United States in the 1950s?
By leftist organizations, I don't know. Whenever I think about bombings, I think about the Weather Underground. I think a little bit later than that. Like I said, 1950s for somebody like me, it usually you think of Beaver Cleaver.
Okay, but let's go to the 60s and 70s. Okay, the Puerto Rican Liberation Front bombed just in New York alone, New York City. The city of New York had over 8,000 bombings by the Puerto Rican Liberation Front in 1 year. The Jewish Defense League, which was operational inside the JDL, literally the militant faction you're not supposed to know about, that was attached to the ADL. The ADL's knuckle arm was the JDL. In New York alone, the JDL was responsible for over 20,000 bombings in 1 year. Their most famous series of bombings were a series of hockey rinks in which they bombed the facilities multiple times. In one case, planting 11 bombs, the other planting 15 bombs throughout the facility. And the more notorious were a series of accidents that took place in which one or two of their bomb factories blew up and took out a good chunk of their personnel in either Chicago or in Boston. Now, one of the most notorious incidents, now this is all happening when you're saying, well, this is happening kind of in a vacuum, peace, love, dope, the flower children. No, this is happening with the leftists making sure that you don't remember that, like, I live in Washtenaw County in Michigan. Ann Arbor. Everybody recognize Ann Arbor? Wolverines! The Wolverine football team. Yeah! And, of course, the University of Michigan. I worked at the U of M. Well, in my lifetime, in just 1 year, while I was growing up, the FBI office on Main Street in Ann Arbor was bombed 54 times. And that's just from one group, which originally was a combination, as you pointed out. First, it was a combination of SDS, the Weather Underground, the Black Panthers, the White Panthers, and then the next step was the Rainbow Party. No, not the faggots we have now. The Rainbow Coalition, as it was called, was a combination of what was left of the combinations of the Puerto Rican Liberation Front, the White Panthers, the Black Panthers, elements of the Weather Underground that had not left the area, and other factions of other even more aggressive off-campus radical organizations.
Okay, well let me. Well, obviously, we're a fertile. There's fertile grounds at that point because. The communist infiltration had already happened nearly 40 years prior to that.
Earlier,
so,
right?
Yeah. So there's already fertile grounds for that to be authentic and kids just getting swept up in the whole thing. But there is also the question of how many of those movements are also infiltrated and made violent to be able.
They absolutely were acknowledging that. In fact, why did the Weather Underground split up? Well, that's right here in my backyard, and I even grew up with some of those people. Okay, my middle brother, who's quite a bit more notorious than I am, he's gone now, he's dead, went to school with a bunch of these people. Okay, so what's interesting about it is that they realized that something was amiss when the oil companies came to the Weather Underground and said, hey, we'll give you more money to do more of what you're doing. That's when that big split took place between the Weather Underground components. Some went to California, others went to most people don't realize they went down to the Ridge. They went down to Nashville and into Kentucky and Tennessee. Now, they didn't stay there very long, but the Nashville component actually is still kind of in place today. Nashville's a hotbed right now, and there's a reason, an extension of that period of time. What's fascinating about this is that, again, they didn't just do bombings. We're talking. I got no notes briefings when I worked as an intel analyst. We had two different types. We have official document briefings with instruments that are handed off to us. The other are what we call no notes briefings, and this is where we were given the security, intelligence, and operation briefings for OPSEC, operational security, inside the United States. Puerto Rican Liberation Front did a whole ton of drive-by shootings. Typically, they would do roll-ups where they had a van with a helicopter door, and they did about 890 drive-by shootings and kneecappings in, 1979, 1980. They had done over 2,000 of the same in the New York, Boston, Washington, D.C. corridor.
So
these groups are operational even in Washington. And in fact, here's what gets me about this. When they tell you about the January 6th, guys, how many times did the leftists virtually occupy the Capitol building? Number one. Number two, how many times has the Capitol building been successfully bombed? And who bombed it? See, nobody asked that question. Now, and not only that, but let me give you a classic. The elements, there were three different factions of the black nationalist parties in Washington, D.C. There were two groups that were Muslim. They had a tiff going on between each other. One group went over to the other's home during prayers, one of their not high rises, but sand fronts, killed all the women, took all the kids, took them into the bathtub, into the bathrooms, filled the bathtubs up with water, turned the kids upside down, and drowned all the kids and left them like popsicles in the bathtub in Washington, D.C. Ever hear of that?
No.
Now, what happened because of that? Well, the people who had been attacked, who lost their women and kids, called the police, of course, asked the police to do something, and like you see with all the other garbage you think this is all new. This is we're talking the 70s here, people. What happened is the police did nothing. They didn't arrest any of the perpetrators. They knew who they were. They even had witnesses, but they refused to because of the political volatility. So what happened is the other faction with machetes, bows and arrows, and one or two handguns and a shotgun took 3 federal buildings in Washington, D.C. hostage. They killed 2 different guards. They wounded a number of other individuals, and they took those 3 buildings hostage and took control of them for 3 going on 4 days. Do you know what happened at the end of the 4th day?
No.
Everybody under negotiation was allowed to walk away without any charges. Now, guys, a person was killed, at least 1, 2 actually, because one guy died of his wounds. So they tried to lay it that, well, he didn't die right away. But anyway, a number of other individuals had critical injuries from machete hacks or being stabbed, which now weren't just police, or they were also just people who were in the buildings. You see no media coverage on this anymore. Why don't we know about these histories? That's in Washington, D.C., in the capital of the United States. So let me ask you something. Do you think January 6th was that bad?
Oh,
no,
yeah,
not even close.
So then my question is: are these things, in relation to what we're talking about with the militia movements? Is this all just to be able to rile up Americans to inflame the militia movement, then to create predicate to put it down, or what?
The militia movement was successful in actually blocking. Both sides have to have coercive force. Okay, first of all, let's understand, what is the foundation of this country? Checks and balances. See, I don't have a problem with leftists arming, first of all, although unfortunately it's the leftists that typically are doing the mass shootings. It's the leftists who will do a lot of the Twilight Zone suicide personal and multiple executions. And if you go through the numbers, we've been covering this for this is the year 2025. The first successful Prozac shooter was Patrick Purdy. There was one other individual we suspect he did the McDonald's shooting before that. In all cases, every person disappeared for a period of time, blah, 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 blah. We have the whole history on that. We had the workups and the autopsies. I have them for these people. They're all on psychotropic drugs. But those people are representative of the other side. And yet, I would tell you, I don't want them disarmed. Daddy didn't trade no fool here. The purpose behind any agenda towards pointing at quote unquote horrible violence, while government is notorious for not just horrible violence, but horrible violence on steroids. They want us disarmed. Now, the militia has not been an issue. The propagandists have made the militia an issue, but it's the militia that founded the country. There was no army on 19th April 1775. 100% militia started the war for independence, period. There was no army. And the militia, later, it was accepted as part of the checks and balances because of the nature of man and corruption. Now, there can be contests between people who call themselves leftists, well, now they're just flat out crazy town, versus individuals who are conservative versus classical liberal. Now, that term isn't used very much, but if you look at the older college teachings, and I'm not talking the 60s, I'm talking going back to the founding of the nation.
Yeah, and Mark, just put a nice bow on this one because we have so much to do.
Yeah, okay, real quick. Bottom line is the militia is actually the check that stopped them from going any farther every time. Now, yes, they still had to try to try to disrupt the militia, but they've never been fully successful. And each time the people who stepped up for their era were successful in counterbalancing what was a planned, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Create the problem, demonstrate the problem, come up with a solution people otherwise wouldn't accept. That was the plan. Each time, though they did gain some ground and then lose some, now I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about the regime, the big power freaks, take your pick, we have been successful. Now, unfortunately, you always have a certain number of wussies and you have a certain number of naysayers no matter what situation you're in. There's an axiom I used before, lead follower, get the hell out of the way. So the people who stepped up, took their chances, did what we were supposed to do, accomplished the task, could have gone farther, but accepted the parameters of that period of time because things have changed. Different incidents develop, or I should say, different tools are developed by the enemy. They're either blocked or they move forward to a degree. We, in turn, counter and create new measures to deal with it, both political, administrative/judicial, and militarily. And that's what the militia is for, because if you don't have the militia to back yourself up with ass, then the old brain trust will be carried away and shot every time.
Yeah, well, you come from a state where the chief executive over there, Gretchen Whitmer, has been at the center of some really interesting operations that have been completely concocted from start to finish, including the whole the kidnapping farce and everything else like that. So we see a lot of that going on. We've seen, you brought up January 6th. I mean, that had been placed squarely on, group leaders that sometimes were not even present in the Capitol Theater, the Capitol City that day. There's also people like Stuart Rhodes, who has been on this show a couple of times over the years, and Oath Keepers. I mean, I know how much Oath Keepers bugged people, going into the 2011, 2012, when all of the racial violence started getting turned up in places like Ferguson and stuff. You had militia groups that were showing up to protect protesters and create a buffer zone between protesters and law enforcement and all that stuff. And the media didn't know how to cover them because, they're white guys with guns mostly, and they're supposed to be part of the racist systemic, this horrible, a reflection of the system that everybody's trying to break free from, or so called. So they got Stuart Rhodes eventually rung up on something with January 6th. So it's interesting to see how it's carried well beyond the 1990s. And I guess if we're ever going to have a chance at preserving whatever we have left, then there has to be some sort of a healthy militia culture in the country, no doubt.
Well, real quick, on the thing with Missouri, with what happened with Ferguson, let's not forget that the militia are the people that stepped forward when the black businesses were at risk of being burned out.
Yeah.
And they didn't care who they were, but you know who drove them out? who argued that you have to leave. Well, it was the state and the Fed, and here's why. Remember that when Ferguson was under attack, we covered that live, including putting on the air all of the dispatch going on. Almost all the dispatch for most police departments is available on the internet. If you didn't know, you need to check it out. And we literally were playing minute by minute what was happening in the discussions between the Ferguson police. All the while Ferguson was being attacked and burned, the Feds and the National Guard and the state police were down the street sitting on their hands. The militia shows up because Ferguson chooses to take care of it themselves, and the militia went to the businesses and said, "We'll protect you." Now, that's like that black woman that had the cake decorating store, and she said, "Oh, hell yes, because this is all I've got, and I have no insurance." So who came in and threatened the militia? The Fed and the state police, because it didn't fit the program, because they needed to have crisis so that the Ferguson Police Department would demand federal and state support, and that way it would be taken over by them. But the last night when they were burned out, organized elements came in and literally ransacked every business and went right through the state police and the feds let them go right by with truckloads of goods that were stolen directly from Ferguson.
Okay.
That's in the dispatch. They were covering the one cop's in the parking lot describing step by step. They brought a vehicle up. They ran the front of the store. The vehicle pulls away. 14 or 15 vehicles pass up to the store. A whole team goes in. They load the truck up. The first one leaves. They back the next one up. They load it up. It leaves. Those vehicles went right past the state police and went right past the Fed, and they thought that was okay. So that makes me wonder who was operating that equipment and who was driving those trucks.
All right. So now let's move on to the next thing.
Yep, go ahead,
I have
please.
a couple of figureheads here. When we talked about alternative media last week, obviously it goes way back before the real height of late night talk radio in the 1990s. We were talking about mainstream AM, FM, but we were also talking about obviously shortwave as a utility that is really a hedge against everything that we have right now that is very fragile and all very shallow, based with shallow roots in the digital world that can be switched off in no time. While it's on, it's miraculous, and we've been able to do so much. But still, we were talking about all of that developing over the course of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I wanted to talk to you about some people that you might have come across along the way. The first thing that keeps popping up in the chat room, especially, for example, here is a super chat that came in from Haywood over on Rumble. Said, "I'm not surprised about Israelis in Waco," which reminds me, was Alex Jones always a shill for Israel? By that I mean, by that I mean Israel never does wrong, and he never talks about them. Well, I mean, you don't have to spend too much time on that in particular. I want to know about your crossing paths and just general talk.
Well, we made Alex Jones.
Okay, go on with that.
Alex Jones wouldn't exist if it weren't for Republic Radio International. What I did when we built Republic Radio International, John Statmiller and myself, and there were a number of other people who helped and pitched in from around the country, we needed to create a central network. We chose to do this. Like I said, normally I did stuff behind the scenes. So what we did is we created a network, Republic Radio International. I took advantage of all the different technicals that we had, people who knew how to get us into the different systems. For instance, satellite. Shortwave, of course, was already in use. Nobody in the present Patriot movement invented shortwave. Remember what I said before? Many people, Sun Radio, again, there's that name, Sun Radio, but it wasn't the Sun Dollar people. Sun Radio Network was way before everybody else. There were many different individuals, but they were just persons. They were people who were stepping up. They would broadcast for an hour at night when they could, and they were usually 6 or 7 individuals in a row, but they were volunteers, okay? But many other names were in shortwave. Shortwave was the old, counterpart to AM, the way AM and FM are related to each other today. That's why people have a hard time relating to shortwave. Alex was doing public broadcasting in Austin, Texas. I had a friend call from down there, a guy actually I've been in service with. He was a intelligence coordinator at that time. He actually worked with the Air Force. I kick me in the microphone if I'm wrong. But anyway, he called. He said, Mark, we got this kid down here I've been watching on public access. They just kicked him off of public access. They kicked Alex Jones off public access, guys, years ago. You think Alex was just kicked off first time recently here? No. So he said, no, he's pretty good, and he's got a good message. And he's done a lot of, interesting stuff that we can all relate to. Can you use him? So I said, well, I'll tell you what, let's get a hold of him. And how about we give him an hour or two up on Republic? Because we got to fill the hours. And so we gave Alex a platform, and then he created InfoWars from there. He was able to build it up. And then we were able to put him up for, well, was it three hours? I had 3 hours. Actually, sometimes I had more. But John and myself did the Intel report, which has been up for 35 years. 30 years, 35 years.
Okay, so then
anyway, Alex came up. We built him up. We gave him shortwave time. We gave him satellite. This gave him all the tools that he needed, and we helped to develop him. And he rode off of the backs of every element of the Patriot movement. And then about the end of the 90s, he basically said, hockey puck all you, because some big money's coming my way. So he was willing to badmouth the militia and badmouth the Patriot effort later on. Way before you hear about it in the 2000, I warned everybody about this because what happened to Alex is what happens to our politicians the same way. And I think I explained to you about this. We take a person who's never been in a position with any kind of money. The person is promoted by us in the Patriot effort independently. We get them elected. They get in there. They start rubbing elbows with these other people that have money. The people who have money say, piss on those peasants that got you in here. If you just ride with us, and here, by the way, here's a free car, and piss on them, and you got to verbally piss on them, then you're with us. These are always one-term individuals. Why? Because they didn't want them around in the first place, but they have a formula for getting the idiots to drink the same Kool-Aid. So through the 90s, through our networks, Alex Jones is the only reason you know about him is because of the Patriot movement and the militia movement that literally financed and built him.
Well, over the years, I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard it because, I've watched quite a bit of InfoWars when I was younger and then you're just in the same media space. So, I have heard so many times over the years about the stories of being offered the so-called proverbial deal and not taking it. But I don't know what that deal is.
No. Oh, hold on. He actually, okay, no, wait a minute. Let's think this through. In the around the 2000 mark, they approached Jones because they were approached, many of us. I was approached several times by different sidebar mechanisms that were like CBS, because if they can get you into a contract, they can shut you up. Understand that. Okay, I already had a plan before I got into this because we know the routine. I worked in intelligence. Those networks are all owned by the intelligence agencies. I've repeated this for 30 years on the air. All of them. We used to call ABC old CIA. Everybody understand that? ABC, when you were at the Intel Center, they didn't call it ABC. They called it old CIA because it's where old agents go to roost. And the only other one that's just as bad is CNN. Okay. And if you pay attention and look at the characters there, well, here's what happened. They approach Jones and say, hey.
Who's they?
The control networks, regular network. He went into a regular network. I believe he was CBS affiliated at that time. And what they said is, we'll syndicate you. And there's the key. All of a sudden, he's syndicated on about 105, maybe it was at 110 AM and FM station, mostly FM. FM's the key because FM's got the voice. FM's got the noise. But in the process, he also, because he's under contract, you're going to get paid, but you got to badmouth these people. So literally, there was a little window of time where he did a total flip. And again, it's tough because, how many millions of hours of radio do you have to go through to get most of the database I'm compressing here? But the fact is, we know the timeline. So basically, he dumped most of the Patriot effort. A lot of comments made against the militia, or at least to create that mood. And that's how you can usually tell who's who in the zoo. Because at the very least, you would be a lot more neutral and maybe supportive because, well, somebody might be coming after your hind end someday. And by the way, we saved Jones several times. We protected him several times. Yes, they have come after us, and it is the physical coercive force that we wield and the willingness to wield it that back them off, because it's equity. This thing, when we talk about this, I know this is tough. We're looking at a 2-hour block here, and it would take. We could pick any subject and open up a whole can of worms. You know that just as well as I do. And the problem is that, tell me your life in 11 minutes. Give me your life in 1 hour. Can you tell me your life's experience in one? Now, you see, I'm not being facetious with you, but my point is that this is the problem when people are tapping a database like this. And the part is, people always ask me, you should be frustrated. No, this is war. If you understand the rolling battlefield or the sine wave of conflict, then understand before you got into it, you're going to have ups, you're going to have downs, you're going to have betrayals, you're going to have successes, you're going to have failures. We didn't win every battle in World War II, contrary to the bullshit they're trying to rewrite. We got our ass kicked in the beginning of World War II. We lost thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of men to actions because we left them hanging out on the end of a stick, especially in the Pacific. But you don't focus on that. You do the rah-rah when you can see 55 aircraft carriers sailing into Tokyo. But before you get there, guys, our situation was so bad in World War II that the clothes were rotting off our men's bodies. They literally were rotting off our men's bodies because we couldn't get the clothes, we couldn't get the ammo, we couldn't get the food to our troops. And that's the part they want to leave out, because if you're going to get people to sign up for a bullshit war, you can't show them the ugly part about what can happen when you're out on the end of the stick.
And that goes to media wars as well, was what you're saying.
And the conflict we're saying here is that what happened is, well, here's the problem. He went along with the theme, and then at a given point, they just said, oh, by the way, you're gone. Oh, Alex Jones was kicked off. Yeah, he was. What they did is the same thing they did with those politicians. He drank the Kool-Aid. They didn't want him around. But the thing is, our independent press has been far more successful than the controlled media, and on pennies rather than hundreds of millions of dollars.
Okay.
When we were successful in Florida, example, politically, we literally stopped a constitutional convention resolution in Florida. The Democrats and even the Republicans estimated that we had to have spent a minimum of about $125 million in advertising and bureaucratic expenses to do what we did. And the only thing we did was word of mouth, cooperation amongst the patriots, which you do not see with the internet. Everybody is constantly trying to be one up.
Okay, let me ask you now. We have to go to the next one. We have to go to the next one, Mark.
Go ahead.
Okay, so because it's Alex Jones is just one guy out there. I know that you had some kind of a history with him, and of course, everybody that's a common thing. Haywood in the Rumble asked a very common question about somewhere along the lines they feel he was changed or some undue influence there. But now, what about this? I have I had a couple of figures I wanted to bring up tonight. The second one was also very critical of Alex Jones, though he did a show with him, I think, one episode. But and I don't expect anybody, colleagues, people occupying the same media space, to ever always get along or even like somebody. Forget about message. Just sometimes you just don't like somebody's personality. Bill Cooper, hosted the Hour of the Time. I think that was mostly on shortwave. He not only had some things to say about Alex Jones, but he had not one positive thing to say about you when he was alive. Not one.
No. Okay, hold on. Not while he was not in the early period, but later on, once we got into the later contest in the aughts, actually in about 99, all of a sudden he had an epiphany of some kind and realized that somebody was feeding him bullshit. Let me help you to understand Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper did not do that much research on his own. Let's say, I'll give you an example. I have a person right here. He's probably the best money person in the United States, period. I have met many scholars, but his name is John Stevenson. I'd even have him up if I were you. Let me see if I can talk to him. He's still alive. But John Stevenson had one of the most complete American money collections privately owned in the country in the 1990s. He gave a class to the Congress of Michigan, both the Senate and the House separately, on money. And they spent 6 hours with him, each group. as he gave them the history of actual currency and money in the United States, and he could physically show them. They tried to assassinate him here in Michigan twice. Now, the one time, the Michigan Capitol Police stopped him and protected him. The Michigan State Police, they said flat out, we're listening on the radios. They've got an ambush plan for you down the road. Mr. Stevenson, if you would, please stay with us here. And just stay here. You can stay in the parking lot. We don't want to control you. We don't want to put you in a car, but stay here, because if you don't, nobody's going to see you tomorrow. But anyway, now, John is a very intelligent individual, but he's got quirks. He's a very, very bright man. He literally is a walking encyclopedia. Okay, I would say, like I said, he's the best man on money we could find.
Okay,
and I've met many of them. So unfortunately, he decided that he wanted to get it out in more ways than you can imagine. Well, Mr. Cooper, what he would do is he would charge you $300 to talk to him if you had a subject. Did you know that?
No.
No, you didn't. If you wanted to talk about a subject, but if you paid the $300, you had to surrender all of your information to Mr. Cooper, and then he was able to claim it for his own. That was his policy all the while. Now, Behold a Pale Horse is a fantastic book, period, no matter how. I'm not ridiculing the book. And I was up on his program. But I was up on his program passing information on in the early days before America in Peril. Okay? He knew that what I was passing on was correct, but he wasn't filtered so he could say, I have discovered. And that's what he did not like, because the way he had it set up, any component of the information base that he acquired, he could then put it up as his research. And that's exactly what he did. Not trying to piss on him in any way, shape, or form, because it was his method of collecting data and becoming a library. And a lot of the information came from other sources that he then, once you paid him the $300 to have an audience with him, you then surrendered all of your data. You gave him an instructional course on the data. In other words, you had to give him all the information you had verbally. And then it was his to do with as he pleased.
Okay.
That doesn't mean you didn't still have it.
So
he made sure that he husbanded it so that he could use it as his own.
So you're claiming, okay. So we see what you're claiming there, that there was some sort of an acquiring of intellectual property. That's what you're claiming. I don't know how to confirm that or anything else like that. But as far as your personal we're talking about. Hold on. I don't know how to.
Okay, hold on.
I just have to
I don't have any problem with him. I don't really. Okay, here's the thing.
I just have to take your. Wait.
It was all one-sided. That's what I'm telling you. It was all one-sided.
All I'm saying.
You got to understand. You got to understand something. Where do I live? Where was I at that time in 1993, 92 or 91? I was in Michigan. Where was Mr. Cooper during that period of time? Well, he lived in his state. I lived in mine. Do you know how big this country is? I'm not judgmental, even of the people that have done quirky things, because I'm not sitting on their doorstep 24/7.
Okay, well, let me ask you about one specific thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one specific thing. Because I'm wondering about your interactions with people in the media space coming up. Now, you said that toward the end of, I guess, Bill Cooper's life, you guys had reached some sort of a turnaround and understanding. He was saying things on one specific. I actually listened to it myself on one specific episode where he questioned everything from your service, your background, said that you switched your story, that you were Air Force, then you said you were Army and all that stuff. Who was feeding him that if it wasn't true, and how did it all get cleared up?
Oh, originally, actually, when I was talking to him, I flat out what happened is I was talking to him and I said, well, I work with the Air Force and I work with, in fact, if you listen, I think it's on recording. It should be on the archives. Is that I had worked with multiple services, which I had, because at the time when I did that, I was working with OPFOR, OPFOR. And My service was with the Army, but I had worked with, and that was one of the things I explained to him several times. This is why I had connective tissue to a lot of the different branches, is because I trained a lot of the different branches. And I explained that to him both on and off the air. There was very little conversation off the air. And there was nothing that was, the only thing I'll tell you what he was really frustrated by. What he tried to do was a setup program, which is probably, I called in at different times. And he specifically acted kind of quirky. You know, if you got a radio ear, which you do, then you can tell when somebody's doing something strange. Well, what he tried to do is set up a situation with another prior service individual so that he could do some kind of ambush hit and miss attack. For whatever reason, it didn't work. I don't know why. I'm not the other end. But he got more and more frustrated progressively. If you can find that particular episode, all this stuff is archived. Listen to it. You can hear where he's getting frustrated with the technology, and he's getting frustrated with it, so he becomes more aggressive. Now, it didn't make any sense because the only thing that I did was pass on information, just kept doing that. Whether or not you want to believe it, that's your problem and your prerogative. But the bottom line is we provided specific data and information in blocks, and I did it anonymously. And I also deflected as much of it as we could, too. I wasn't doing anything publicly. Let me give you an example of that. I never did any public media interviews with any networks except for, and I can count them on 5 fingers. Why? Because I didn't need them. This is something everybody has a hard time with. Did you watch the Sam Donaldson interview that was done?
No.
It's on YouTube. That's one of 5. Do you know how many thousands and thousands of times the press would come up with a microphone and go, "Well, Mr. Koernke, we'd like to interview you." I'm sorry. I appreciate the fact you're doing your job, but I don't do interviews. When the Time magazine piece was done, go read it. That's the one that everybody does. "Oh, Time magazine said," and you said. I was not interviewed for with Time magazine, by Time magazine. I was never interviewed by Time magazine. They wanted to interview me. In fact, I was told by people that I knew in Time magazine, "Mark, if you'd done any kind of interview, your picture would have been on the front page of Time." Instead, they had to put a picture of the estrogen pill on there because they didn't know what to put in the front cover. But I did it. I did this for a reason, because what happens is your enemy has to construct and fabricate. This is the problem that Cooper had, is that, and again, part of it is all I did was pass information on. But Mr. Cooper wouldn't be able to say it was his information because we were just directly talking to each other. And I didn't pay the $300.
Gotcha.
That I think was the problem. And I think it was the only problem. Now, here's the thing. As things became more intense in the post-Oklahoma City period, where we were not gone, the militia was not only alive, but we were functioning better than the enemy had ever anticipated. But what happened is then they started the pressure initially on him and started targeting him for elimination. And so all of a sudden it kind of sank in that they were trying to kill him. And what happened to him? They killed him. Does everybody understand that? See, I can talk about things. "Oh, that's crazy. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about." He's dead. Why is he dead? They specifically went through a series of actions, and I described even privately to these people. I walked through it I've had conversations with our people in these positions, and I walked them right through. Before I ever went public, I already sat down with my wife, with all my allies, and I said, "Okay, we're going to be able to run for about 2 years before they pull out the rest of the cards. Here's what they're going to do. Now we need to be prepared for it. The first thing we're not going to do is any press interviews. So anything you see written about me in the controlled press, if you go to the psychobabble, internet, it's all inference, because there isn't any first person. And the only articles that are first person, they had to reconstruct or try to. And in fact, the Sam Donaldson interview, let me give you an example. We got only so much time here. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The Sam Donaldson interview, you got to go watch it. Why? "Oh, Mark, that was really great." Guys, the Sam Donaldson interview was negotiated after the Oklahoma City bombing because we only did 2 interviews. John Statmiller did an interview over on the west side of the state, and I did 1 interview over on the east side of the state. It was done right in downtown Dexter. Now, the good thing is it was local, so a lot of locals got to see how the press lies. The interview was supposed to be live. There was probably going to be a time delay, as there always is for the networks, of however many minutes. When we got there in preparation, they said, oh, by the way, we can't make the uplink. Now, mind you, they had an uplink satellite truck there, and we work equipment that's newer than what they have, but we have some that's just like what they had in the whole van for uplink work. So what did they do? Well, then Donaldson links up. Well, we're not going to do it live. And then what they did is an hour, and I think Nancy could tell you for sure, she was timing it, 1 hour and 25 minutes. Go watch to see how long that interview was. How many minutes was that interview? Now, when I ended the original hour and 25 minutes, everybody there they were not patriots. They were just people who owned the restaurant, people who were from the town. They go, wow, that was a really great interview. Boy, they're not going to be able to do anything with that. Well, what you see, which everybody still says, wow, Mark, that's a real great interview, is a chop job of about 13, 15 minutes?
Oh yeah, whenever you show up for something live and suddenly it's going to be taped, you know that it's just going to be sent over to the editing department. But let me ask you something else.
Which is why we didn't do that, because then you have to lie.
Yeah.
And when you lie, then we catch you in the lies, and we use that as ammunition to go after you.
Yeah, or you have to adopt a new way of talking, so it makes it impossible for them to edit things very cleanly, and at least makes it very sloppy job for them. Let me ask you about one more thing before we go, and that is, that's as mainstream as alternative media was getting in the 1990s is, I would say, something along the lines of Coast to Coast. And you're talking about that level of syndication. But, as much old school Coast to Coast I've gone back and listened to, and it became more and more important for me to have this series of conversations with you about the militia movements and everything else. And that is Art Bell in particular expressed, as I'm listening to these episodes throughout the mid and late 90s, there's a lot of concern from him and a lot of the people who got through and as guests and or audience members of us being on the verge of civil war and all that stuff. But, Coast to Coast, whereas they did a very good job letting everybody express their thoughts and their concerns, mainly took a government side on a lot of it. So, I never listened to every episode, but I didn't know if along the way over those years you were ever mentioned, you ever had an interaction with Art or the show. I was wondering about that.
Oh, I've called in probably 100. Oh, I won't say 100, but dozens of times to Coast.
And you got on,
George. But here's the thing. Hold on. One of the things to remember about Coast to Coast, when Coast to Coast first came up in its infancy, it was pro-patriot, pro-militia, and I'm talking very early on. And Art Bell would talk about everything and preparedness, and he received and was showered with gifts of generators, weapons, ammunition, all kinds of things. And everybody saw the same thing happen. At a given point, a switch was hit, and he became antagonistic towards anything or talking about it per se on the air. If he was forced to, he couldn't be too obvious. But progressively being antagonistic to the Patriot movement in general, to the militia, you could talk about Bigfoot, you could talk about anything like UFOs or frivolous stuff, but you could not talk about substantive information. Now, it wasn't just him. You got to remember something. He was owned by a network. Most all of these people, now again, with Cooper, no, Cooper owned himself, but Cooper was affiliated with another standoff group that were able to help to get his connection to communications grids, to the system. And so he wasn't just on shortwave. He actually was in radio here and there around the West. But he was not controlled the way that Art Bell was. And at a given point when Art Bell felt comfortable, what he did is first he started yapping about he was going to leave America. Remember, he got a Filipino bride. And he was yapping about he was leaving America because it was going to fall, the police state's here, and he's going to the Philippines. Well, he sold all the gifts that were given to him. Everything that was his treasures. I mean, he had garages full of stuff that was gifted to him, and basically said, piss off. Well, he went to the Philippines, What happened is he started to try to put up a ham radio set in the apartment he was in. The Filipinos thought he was a U.S. government spy, and so he had to unass the Philippines because he was just trying to slide some stuff into place that you would normally have here in America. Nobody'd think twice about, but he wasn't in America. So he came back here. He tried to reintroduce himself back to coast to coast, but George Norrie had, in the time before he was gone, George Norrie had established himself well. He was more lenient towards direct conversation, and in fact was pro-patriot and pro-militia, but he couldn't go too far. And so progressively, when Bell came back, they tried to kind of throw him back up there, but it was curdled milk, because when he left, he had burned every bridge that he could. Privately, everybody in the Patriot movement was an idiot. The country is going to burn. We're all going to die. He's going to go have sex with the Filipino bride until he dies, and he's not a Filipino bride, but he just had to come back to the place that was going to burn down.
Well, I mean, what I noticed was there's definitely a government loyalty leaning there, and if you listen to enough of those reruns, there's always a reminder and a disclaimer that he doesn't believe in conspiracy theories, which I think is odd, because for any of the other guests that are talking about government programs, I mean those are all conspiracies,
right?
So that's something that I always pay attention to there. But as far as just time capsule conversations, it really was very illuminating to see all these come together. I mean, as far as government loyalty goes, it's incredible to see how long it took Art to come around to things like TWA 800 being a huge military cover-up. But he eventually did that. That's a game changer right there. You're learning about TWA. That should be a game changer, a red pill moment for people right there too. If the government won't fess up to an accident that was deadly, are they ever going to disclose anything willingly if there was ever intent to do harm? So that's
well, real quick. Flight 800 wasn't an accident; it was intent. Aviation Weekly. Do you know that the area where we're talking about, where Flight 800 flies, where those flights are actually still active, they still fly through that area? That is a missile test, a live fire missile test and drop area for missiles. When they're operating and testing equipment, they do what's called a deadhead drop, and they drop the weapon, an inert version of the weapon, and see how it detaches from the aircraft. Step 2, they do it as an active system if it's a missile, to show that it drops and the missile activates. The third is they do actual combination of drop, drive, and bomb, where the actual ordnance is on board. Well, they don't just do air-to-air, they also do surface-to-air in that area of operation. If you go to Aviation Weekly, which is printed every weekly, I don't know if it's still printed, but if you go back to the period of Flight 800, go back 3 months before Flight 800 and read the scheduled log of activities for that air corridor, and you're going to go, oh my.
So you're saying you go as far as saying that this was intent, that they killed all those people in Long Island?
Yep, there's somebody on board. Well, obviously there were 3 people at least on board that they certainly wanted dead. But the big thing here again is, after the fact, one of the things you should tell you something is, remember the husband and wife reporters who snuck over, and while one of the trucks was parked, I think it was over near an overpass, they actually got a sample of the material that was being pulled, that was in the wreckage. It was the red oxide. And for actually acquiring that sample, kind of like if you took wreckage from the World Trade Center, they were arresting people for that. In certain areas, only where you saw the burns or stuff that was weird. Those 2 went to prison with 5 or 10 years. I think it was 5 and 7 year sentences. They went to prison. And what did they do? All they were doing was reporting on Flight 800.
Very interesting. There's a lot there.
Yeah, there's a whole background on that. That's a sidebar. Real quick, before we go any farther, let's understand something. First of all, America is big. The most common mistake Americans make, and even people right now listening, and I'm sorry, I'm not belittling you, but here's the problem. We're television screen oriented. The Patriot movement was vast. I've argued, or I tried to explain, my job before I became public was to work in negotiation and getting people to work together. I was able to create a coalition that worked virtually across the whole of the United States. My job is to make sure that feathers don't need to be ruffled. Cooper is probably the best example of somebody who just was volatile, but he was isolated too. In his area of operation and with the people that he was associated with, he did really great work, and it was priceless. In fact, that's one of the things that everybody's scratching their head out about why he was acting the way that he was. In the Patriot circles with all of us, we were the ones doing all the running around, moving and shaking. Now, Bill did the same thing. We were speaking to some of the same locations all over the country together. Other individuals were just downright cantankerous, but this is part of the problem when you have a large confederation of people. This is why you have a problem with the internet right now, because the confederation can reach so many more people, and everybody has their own ideas, which is good, but they don't know how to interact to actually work towards a common goal. And the reason we were so successful in the late 80s, early 90s, and why we came almost to the edge of war that time, is because the whole of the country was on the basic understanding page that the powers that be had a plan, and we better have our plan. In 1994, we came a breath away from, and this is a compression that leads you into the next time I come back. In 1994, we had the information on the planned mass arrest, late 94, October. We had a complete list of operational points of control, who was going to be operating what. We knew, like, for instance, in Michigan, the 300th MPPW Command would be participant in setting up internment and operations against the American Patriot Movement and planned mass arrests. But they weren't the only ones. It was all over the country. What did we do? Did we shake our fists and scream? No. You know what we did? We took the entire database to the Senate. And we went to a series of congressmen and senators who already were up to speed on everything from the Prozac shooters to everything else you can imagine. They had inside information from their direction, but they were isolated. And we shared it, and we said, okay, here's the thing. If they come out and attempt mass arrests, we will shoot their ass. We're going to war. We're all ready to go to war. But you attempt this, and that's the end. Well, the Senate went to the FBI with the information and demanded a response. And if you think for the first time, like you've seen in the last few years, well, the FBI just doesn't answer. Well, the senators, for 3 weeks and then 4, demanded a response and got no response on the information that they had available, because they have to ask questions. They can't just say, hey, we've got this, and throw it at them. The idea is respond to my request and an additional request for data. At the end of the 4th week, the only thing that the FBI responded with is, how do you know about this? There was no denial. Now, this is why when you hear about the Oklahoma City bombing was done by elements of the Mossad and elements of the federal government. The Oklahoma City bombing was planned far in advance, but it was it wasn't supposed to be isolated. As I've told you before, the bomb was created, because there was more than one, and there was more than one ready for more than one location, was created at Camp Gruber. Now, I need to send you the photographs I have. I can give you an aerial photograph. I didn't take the aerial photograph. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol took the photographs of Camp Gruber. They were watching it surreptitiously as it operated day by day. There is no doubt that that's where the bomb came from the exterior that was used. It wasn't created by Timothy McVeigh. It was created by elements of the U.S. government and the Israeli Mossad operating at Camp Gruber. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol identified and recorded all of the license plates for all vehicles coming and going. And all of this database was made available to the federal government, who was complicit. So guess where it went? Now, they didn't throw it away. In other words, they didn't just give them everything and say, well, I hope you keep it. Copies of everything was made. Everything was made. This is why there was this balance of power thing. Why didn't they go farther and attack the militia extensively after the Oklahoma City bombing? They didn't. In fact, the Oklahoma City bombing went from Oklahoma to Decker, Michigan, to my doorstep in 3 days.
Wow.
Now here's again. I'm in Michigan. Oklahoma is in Oklahoma. Okay. The idea wasn't that I was involved with the bombing. The idea was it would be the excuse to attack. Everybody has just seen several thousand people arrested with no justification, and you're scratching your ass and saying, well, they wouldn't have done that to Mark Koernke. Well, the same people that you're now seeing trying to bleed your country white and burn your country down have been doing it for decades. They didn't just start last week or 4 years ago. They've been at this for decades. And they've been countered by many different good people. I'm not the only one. Bill Cooper knew a lot more and wouldn't say a lot more, or isolated what it is that he passed on to the people that he associated with, even though he knew what he knew more. Now, that's the problem I have, but it's because of personalities. You still have all the other issues you have when you deal with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and then millions of people, all interacting as a force. The important thing, my job was basically you keep pushing people towards the bad guys. You have all kinds of people who are either A, and yes, there are, everybody always pisses their pants. There's infiltrators. Guys, there were infiltrators in 1775. After April 19th, we sieged Boston. Does everybody go read the Siege of Boston? You do realize that the third week into the Siege of Boston, 3 deep spies, one of them a doctor, were officers of the militia. They jumped the fence and gave all the information on the deployment of the militia to the Redcoats, to the commander of the British forces.
Well said, Mark. We can't go back to the 18th century right now, though.
I know, but my point is the same thing. It's the idea. Again, we're talking, this has always been the case. And here's the thing. Those people can be easily identified. There is a feel. One of the things that people are not used to, in fact, this is what's really the problem with the internet. It is not human. You do not have the sensory interaction that you need as human beings to be able to make proper decisions. You have a two-dimensional image at best, and barely that, of anything, any subject when it comes to interaction with people. When you're with a person, you sense, you evaluate, your subconscious works constantly. And I've always said this a million times, and I'll say this to everybody listening right now. If you're in a room or if you're in a situation and the hair comes up on the back of your neck, don't you shove it off, because your subconscious has registered a specific amount of information and it's trying to tell you something. Pay attention and listen, because that's the most common mistake made. Well, you can make judgments. And again, somebody asked me, like, how many assassination attempts? Well, actually, more than a few. I've been hit more than once, actually. I did radio while I was bedridden for 4 weeks. Nobody knew. I took a hit when I was in Denver. You know what? Did we say anything? Hell no. I was up for 1 hour, 2 hours a day doing the program as if I was fully functional. But you can ask my wife, I was bedridden. I was down. And you know what? You couldn't tell. Why? Because for 22 hours, I shut the hell up and I rested. But when I was in the fight, you stayed in the fight.
Well,
that's how you have that. That's the attitude everybody's got to have. But that's, again, interaction with people.
Episode 3, we're going to talk about interactions and staying in the fight and superhuman abilities to heal and all that other stuff.
No, it's not super. No.
You have to have your mind.
Just healing. The idea is, guys,
you need a superhuman mindset. You need if you're overcoming at that point, those kinds of attacks. I'm saying it's a superhuman mindset right there to keep that focus.
Everybody can be taught that. One of the things.
Okay.
Let me just one last thing here. What makes special forces special? But for all the bullshit I see, I'll tell you what. I know men when I was in service who were 4'8", and if you saw them on the street, you wouldn't know who they were, and yet they were some of the most competent. And guys that were 6'6". One guy wanted to be in helicopters, but he wanted SF. Okay, SF is mindset and intelligence. It's not brawn. And that's the part that they want to. They always see the bullshit in these movies with Johnny Jet Jock and Arnold Schwarzenegger types. Yeah, there's some of those guys in there. But brain, intelligent, and again, also spirit are more important and are why so many people fail to understand the actual method of success with special forces. Now, with all the electronic gimmicks and all the other crap today, there's a sidebar there. But the idea is the spirit commands the mind commands the body. Anybody can be brought to that discipline. But if your public fool system is creating a crappy product, then what do you get as a product to work with? And that's where our problem has been for quite some time.
Okay.
The can't-do attitude is typical for old Europe. The can-do attitude of America is what the enemy is absolutely terrified of. Every aspect of whatever we do here, there's an answer or a can't-do attitude position. Now, the important thing is to get past that.
Yes, we
overcome
must.
it.
Yes, we must.
Right, and I know I get it out of your way. Anyway, we're
no. I'm just saying. Well, one branch leads to another. Mark. I mean, we can't. I wish we had a 5-hour show. I was just trying to hit the major points. I hope you don't feel like I'm rushing you.
No. No, not at all. It's just reverse. Again, the idea is to share. Guys, we're supposed to be. Here's the other thing, and I am dead cold serious about this. You want to win, you have to be multi-generational. Let me tell you the most stupid thing I've heard recently. The slang, the boomers are at fault, is starting to sink in with a lot of people. That's really stupid. I am dead cold serious. You better step back and think about that. How many boomers do you think were in this fight you don't even know about that took a whole lot of abuse, that took getting spit on, getting pissed on, lost their jobs, stayed in the fight? And the only reason you're still here and can still squawk and talk right now is because of those people before you. And again, this is what I've tried to emphasize, and the people before them, and the unsung people before them. Guys, we beat them back in World War I. The League of Nations was supposed to destroy the sovereignty of the United States. Why didn't that happen? Why didn't it happen? And by the way, they had the money, they had everything else set up. Well, you're not supposed to ask that question. It just happened. No, it didn't. It's because a whole bunch of people with grit worked together. They weren't all perfect, and they didn't have all the answers, but they did understand the threat, and they had the solution for the time. You're facing the same problem because this is always an attack on our Bill of Rights.
Right.
This is always an attack on you and I being property or free.
And they had the media back then, too. After the League of Nations failed, that's when the CFR was created, and that's when they started buying up every paper they could, everything. Yep. They got into the media business after that to start changing the culture and the mindset and going toward, a little bit more of a centralized globalist view on the world and how to stabilize it in the generations to follow. Then they were primed for the United Nations. Mark, you are live every night at 8 p.m. What is it again?
We're on from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 8 to 9 p.m., which overlaps with your program this hour now, well, past this hour now. And that is on www.libertytreeradio.4mg.com and libertytreeradio.org.
Do you take calls?
I think, yeah. Well, again, forgive me, I don't have the number right in front of me again here. I'm so used to. Yeah, I do.
Well, I mean, if they're listening, I'm not.
Yeah,
you don't have to do that now.
If you go to Liberty Tree Radio, if you just go to Liberty Tree Radio, it's all posted there on libertytreeradio.4mg.com. You can get into the conference room, and that's how we take calls. So you can come up on the conference if you got questions. If you got anything you want to ask about, even the subject we were talking about here, because our people were listening the same time your people are listening.
Yeah.
But the big thing here again is, guys, when you start that other guy did it all. No, they didn't. I'm 68 years old. Do I sound 68 years old? Do I sound like I'm 68?
No, you're full of spunk.
Do I sound like I'm 68? Now, there's a thing about that. There are people who do sound older because they've had high mileage. I've had high mileage. But the fact is that what they're terrified, and this is what you all need to start thinking about, is multinational efforts. Think about it like being in track. I was in track. If you're in a baton stand, like pass off, you're not the only man. There is a guy that's your leg man, the guy who is just a kick-ass. He can run past everybody. But you have to work as a team in order for him to get the baton, to get to where he can go to do the job. And every time a new generation comes up, that's the new base man. However, you want to be strong, you want to kick their ass. Well, how about the idea that rather than having to keep relearning lessons because everybody keeps forgetting, how about because of this wonderful database thing that we don't use properly called the Internet? The Internet's garbage in, garbage out until we fix it. And most of that has to do with isolating and creating our own libraries where we can preserve the data. Half of what I'm talking was given knowledge as a baby boomer because it was in the news and in front of you. All I did tonight was pick certain points that you're going to be forced, I hope, to get on the keyboard, go back and search and go, son of a bitch, I didn't know that.
Plenty of that going on.
how many times? Let me ask you, how many times was the Capitol building bombed? If the attack supposedly on January 6th was so bad, do you know who bombed? Who was the last? I'm going to give you a big hint here. Who was the last woman to bomb the Capitol building?
Oh boy!
Do you know what's really cute? They didn't just get a bomb on the front porch or over in the loading dock. They put bombs in the restaurant of the Senate and the Congress.
That was during Clinton. I remember that.
And what happened is, only because there was an unscheduled call for a vote, and almost everybody ran up to the floor to take care of the vote. If they would normally have all been there, then the bomb went off. Now, do you know what happened to the woman who did that bombing?
Released on her own recognizance?
Well, almost. Okay, number one, she was tried. She was caught along with the rest of the clique. She was tried, put in prison, but she's not. Now think about this. She bombed the Capitol building. We're not talking about conspiracy. I believe you were thinking about it. We're talking about actually blowing out the Capitol restaurant. She's out. She's walking around, and she's doing the college circuit on your college campuses across America. She was released by Obama.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah. You know, there's been a lot like that, Mark, and it's something that we all.
There've been many.
Yeah, we all expect. We all expect at this point. You know, it's just there's a split in the foundation, and when you have that, when we've been this fractured, you could do things like that, and there's going to be a hell of a lot of people that will, at least on the first surface, or they can project support for something like that. That's what they do. You know, it
tells you about the occupation of your country, though.
It does.
You see, this is is why, again, step back and take a few breaths.
We are taking it.
And then start going through. The problem is this, too. We don't want to relive it, but we haven't seen it yet, but we're on the cusp of the next wave right now.
Right.
Guys, you bring 30 million illegal aliens in, and you bring a massive number of foreign military-age Chinese illegal aliens who aren't really illegal aliens. They're shipped to Mexico and Central America. They're brought up across the border, and they're escorted to places in country. Your government did that. Your government did it so that you can create the crisis, because every element of our government cooperated in that. There is no way to excuse that, and nothing that Trump has done is going to fix that before it wrecks.
Well, we're going to, and that's a good place.
Everybody knows it.
Yes, that's a good place to put a bookmark right there, Mark.
Yep, right there. We got it.
A bookmark Koernke. That's what we're going to say. Bookmark Koernke. I'm going to have to go pine through this whole thing to find a couple other points to then, hopefully toward the tail end of summer or something we can do again. Of course, as you know, anytime you're watching and you want to comment on any one subject, please do so. But I'm looking forward to making this a trilogy at some point soon, and I hope you had a good time tonight.
Oh yeah. Anytime anybody has any questions, I'm not going to get upset, because, like I said, I've been there and seen this. It's like,
I get you.
The only problem is having the time to relate it.
I understand. Yeah. Well, we did as much as we could in the time allotted to us, but I'm sure we'll find some more in the future. And I appreciate you, and we will talk again. And everybody, I hope you go check him out. The Intelligence Report. It does a lot of talk, and you can call into a show. And do you guys stream digitally on Rumble or anywhere else? Do you have
Not yet. Well, actually, if you look, the Intel Report is posted by a number of people. I'm banned off X. I was banned off X. I was one of the first people kicked off. Oh, come on.
Okay, but it's not on Rumble, or it's not on YouTube.
But we are. But I'm being reposted on Rumble. I'm not doing it. Somebody else is. We're on BitChute, and it's being posted up on X also, the Intel Report. So it's up there.
Okay, got you.
If you look and do a search for either Mark Koernke, I think, or again, the Intelligence Report. And again, this one is probably already being posted right now as we speak, since we're past the hour block. Whoa, way past the hour block for you. I'm sorry.
Listen, you're on a roll, and I have it's one of my rules. I really like to, I have to every once in a while inject a couple of follow-ups in there, because if I want some clarity on something that was said, But otherwise, I like, hanging back and just letting you go. But yeah, you're right. We are a little bit past, and we will have, I'm sure, another opportunity to do a lot more. So thanks again for the time tonight, Mark. It was great talking with you.
Very good. God bless the Republic. Death to the New World Order. We shall prevail, ladies and gentlemen. The empire is on the run, and we're on the march. God bless. Good night.
God bless. Be well, Mark. There he goes. There he goes. A wonderful, warm conversation with Mark Koernke. Listen, I sit back. If I see any of you, let your guests speak, I will reach through the fucking computer. I swear to God. I swear to God, if anybody says that, I don't let people speak. And I like it too. But, there was so much. Again, I have notes from the first time that we got together that we haven't even sniffed, because I don't want to constantly be wrangling and interrupting. But there was I'm just trying to take a walk around the park here, and we're just stopping to smell the flowers, and then we're rearranging the flower bed. Then we're taking the daffodils and putting them where the tulips were, and then we're going to the bathroom. And then we're going to the playground. And then while I'm on the slide, somebody else is on the swings. And all I want to do is just walk to the other side of the park. So listen, it's fun. I take that lighthearted because people are just who they are. I love listening to Mark Koernke talk. That's his personality. I don't want to change it. You can't change it. But at the end, it starts getting funny. Like I was laughing. I couldn't not chuckle to myself because I can feel you guys. I can actually feel you. Oh, I loved it. But he'll be back. Now listen, here's a couple of things as I was doing along the way. As far as private currencies during the Great Depression, I didn't find anything at first, and then I finally got a hit on Grok, because then I switched over there. And Grok came up with the nature of municipal scrips. SCRIP, a scrip. Let's see here. Because of widespread bank failures and shortage of circulating currency, to address local economic stagnation, many municipalities issued scrip, a form of local currency used as an alternative to the U.S. dollars. They were not private currencies in the modern sense, but they were temporary, community-based substitutes for money and often used to pay workers, facilitate trade, or stimulate local economies. So they were issued by city governments, chambers of commerce, the local government, local businesses when federal currency was scarce, especially during the 1933 banking crisis. It was often denominated in dollars or fractions thereof and redeemable for goods, services, taxes within a specific locality. Examples? Let's see here. Notable examples. Tanina, Washington issued wooden money. Wood. You remember I sent out those wooden coins for Christmas? Wooden money printed on thin wood slices in denominations like 25, 50 cents, $1. That started in 1931 after the local banks failed. Des Moines, Iowa issued scrip to pay municipal workers accepted by local merchants. Atlanta, Georgia. It varied from paper to metal tokens or even wooden coins. Scale and impact. The total volume of municipal scrip in circulation was a small fraction of the federal currency, likely less than 1% of the estimated 5.5 billion currency in 1933. But states like Michigan, as Mark said, Michigan, Iowa, Wisconsin, they saw significant scrip activity, often coordinated by state relief agencies. Michigan's banking crisis in 1933 led to widespread use of scrip by municipalities and businesses. So, Federal Reserve, an annual report of the Federal Reserve in 1934 notes that private banks under state supervisions, including Michigan, held deposits and issued financial instruments. Brandon Williams. Instruments. Some of these banks may have facilitated scrip issuance, though not as state currency. So yeah, so that's what he meant by private currency. Other things there's no evidence that I can find that Alex Jones or his media platform was ever directly affiliated with CBS. But that's not necessarily needed for there to be a proverbial offer that was tendered. And I mean, how many times have you heard Alex Jones over the years say, I was offered the deals and I said no to the New World Order and whatever, and that's why he stays public, to keep himself alive. So I didn't find any CBS thing. I don't know what you were fact checking along the way or looking into or getting more on, but I got quite a bit there. Quite a bit. And I'm sure that there'll be plenty of interesting comments. Let's get to the super chats. Jay Britt says, great show, Frank. I have it on good authority that the perfect medium for preservation of audio is Beatmax by Sony. I couldn't even get, it's little things like that. Where was I going to bring up the VHS thing? I wanted to go back to it, if not for any other reason, but just to have a little fun with Mark and also get some clarification, because everybody was trying to. Everybody had a theory as to what Mark was saying, whether or not VHS was just the best high quality storage device for media that can be in its time, in its age, or if still today have VHS ready to go to record television, which again, that was the first leap, because nobody watches television for information anymore. If you're taping network news, what the hell are you getting? You want protest coverage? You want any kind of coverage? Then why aren't you getting it from people who are there with their phones on Periscope or whatever the hell that it is on YouTube or TikTok? I mean, there's everybody, individual people, thousands of them. Every square block is streaming and posting. So, I don't see how VHS comes into that, but there's no bringing it up. No time for it. I'll have to find a time. Hello Kitty says, Frank, you only grew knowing fire and tornado drills. Gen X grew up with those, as well as nuclear bomb drills. Gen X still had nuclear bomb drills? I definitely never had a nuclear bomb drill. I never had a tornado drill either over here in New York, that we didn't have that. We had fire drills. We left the school, we had to file. We loved fire drills. Awesome. Get to leave the school. Awesome. We get to leave our classes. We go outside. We stand around for a couple of minutes. Then we come back inside and the thrill is gone. AW1984 says, I listened to last night's show at work and I heard the comment about boxer dogs. My boxer is 12 years old and still wants to eat the delivery people. She's still as nimble as ever on a walk. She hasn't been to a vet in 10 years. My advice, stop vaxing your pets annually. That's an interesting thought. Anybody that could back that up? I can see how that would be a big impact. Curtis Good on Rumble says, I remember listening to Mark back in the 1990s post-Waco massacre when I was involved in 2 citizen militias in the Dallas area. I was never sure if he was involved with militia of Michigan. I think he is. I think that's what it was. Curtis again says, oops, I think MOM is militia of Montana. Norm Olson was a militia. Okay. Gotcha. Again, Curtis says, I used to get underground VHS tapes of Mark's appearances on Tom Valentine's radio show. I remember his interview with Sam Donaldson. I'm going to have to go look at it. And one more time, he says, I used to get underground VHS. Well, we have that. That's a repeat. Are these all repeats? The Patriot movement in the 1990s was an awesome time. You had Bo Gritz, Randy Weaver, and the Republic of Texas movement as well. It was good times. He just referenced the April 19th, 1776. April 19th, 1993 was the Waco massacre. Interesting. Well, that is one of those, you want to talk about numerology, you want to talk about significant dates in history. April 19th, that April 20th area is, you see a lot of big hits as far as tragic stuff or violent events. Obviously, you start talking about Lexington and Concord. Yeah, it's violent. What do we consider it in the end result? Tragic? No. It gave us our nation. Well, the lights are turning off in here now. I have the timers on. It's 9:25. Nobody's even listening anymore. It's just me. Nobody's even around. Hold on, let me turn the light back on. Ceiling lights. Where the hell is it? Broadcast room. Boom. All right, what else? Haywood says, stop interrupting your guest, Frank. Go to hell. I know he's joking. I know he's joking. Okay, over on Quite Frankly.tv, happy hump day, says Vesper. Wendy says, I love to you, Frank. Hugs to you, your mom, Lauren, Aurora, from Wendy. Oh, and Krista, too. Hats off to Krista, the producer. Kjusps, thank you. Squickly, Rival 696 says, I just want to know if Mike has an extra VCR for sale. Mike or Mark? He probably has an extra VCR. Vespers 007 says, word to the wise, soak up summer and let the chips fall where they may. That's what I'm doing. Delona 55, again, thank you for everything. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. It's going to be a good one tomorrow night. I have Jay Gulanello coming in, and we have there's a mix of topics. But, I don't know, there's just a lot on the mind. And I think that tomorrow night, if I'm going to put my money on it, it's going to be a really good anything goes kind of a night. And I hope to take a lot of your calls, and maybe I'll give some stuff away. I'm going to give away some silver tomorrow night. I have one more silver ounce to give away, and I'm going to do that. So I thank you all. Thank you for the time here tonight. I had a voicemail from Nathan for Mark that I'm going to have to download and keep on hand because there's no place to put it in there. None. No place whatsoever. I also have a birthday wish from Molly Artie for the Sentinel. Happy birthday to the Sentinel. That's from Molly Artie. She sent me a voicemail as well, but there's no time to play it because it's already midnight. Okay? And that's what I have for you. Thanks again to Molly from Keto Brainz. I just want to say thank you to her again because, I want you guys out there. This audience keep the show going. And without you guys sponsoring as individuals, we're just really, we wouldn't go anywhere. And I am planning a very aggressive summer marketing action, a plan of action, because we got to make some breaks for ourselves. And aside from that, there's a lot of other things going on. Planning of this event in September. There are other things that we're working through and trying to defeat. There's also the thought about this studio and the future of this studio, where we're going to be over the next couple of years. But the one thing that makes us completely foolproof is you guys and gals at home. So thank you so much for all of your support, and thank you to Keto Brainz for being our main sponsor of the show. Having one or two businesses up along with the show to boost you guys, who are the lifeblood of what I do, is really, it makes me grateful. So thank you all so much. Become a sponsor. Go drink some Keto Brainz, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Be good and take care. Even this.
I'll catch you on the flip side. Will you shut up?